Hi everyone, so I'm back with another unpopular opinion video where I read your unpopular opinions and react to them. And I want to thank everyone for submitting your opinions. I would not be able to make this video without you guys, so I very much appreciate the fact that you guys are putting yourselves out there. And as you watch this video, please keep in mind that the people are not here to defend their position. So if you hear an opinion that you disagree with, and especially if my opinion diverges from theirs, please keep an open mind that perhaps they may have some good arguments and some good points, but because they're not here, they're not able to fully elaborate on their opinion. So with that in mind, let's get started. I don't mind that Lane's band ultimately failed. Call me callous, but it's more realistic. Do I wish they maybe at least had one hit wonder and that instead of taking over the antique shop, she got her own music store and maybe taught kids music on the side? Sure, but hey, nothing's perfect, and ultimately, I liked that the band failed. Like I said, more realistic, but also, what the hell would this show even do with a successful band? Yeah, I could totally see what you're saying here. It is a lot more realistic for the band to fail, and you have make a really good point about the fact that if Lane was successful, it might steal the show away because here we have these rock stars and this very, simple life that Lorelai and Rory are leading. So it does kind of make sense from a narrative standpoint. I don't know if I have a strong opinion on that. I think it would have been interesting to see if Lane's band succeeded precisely for what you're saying, the fact that it would have been such a grandiose thing. But I also completely understand that it is a lot more realistic that the band didn't work out. I didn't mind that Lane got pregnant or that the band didn't get that big. What bothered me is that they didn't really show her doing something else with her passion. For example, teaching music. Yeah, I get that. I think a lot of people had this feeling when it came to the revival that it's not so much about the fact that Lane did become successful, but the fact that she didn't really pursue her passion. And I do kind of feel aligned with this opinion as well, that it would have been nice because it almost feels like a backtracking of the fact that she has spent so much of her time focusing on music. And even before she started to play the drums, she loved music. And then she was really, really happy about being in a band. And so it kind of feels like it falls apart a little bit that she ends up kind of playing band on the side, but she never really pursues her passion. And it would have been nice if the show allowed her to kind of pursue her career in the musical direction. One of my unpopular opinions that Rory's not a bad friend to Lane. Yes, she was in that one or two episodes when they were in high school during the first few seasons, but she does show up consistently when Lane really needs her, like when Lane stayed with her at Yale or when she asked Rory to be a bridesmaid and a godparent, or when she needed to talk to someone after her disastrous honeymoon and found that she was pregnant. I agree. I also kind of land on this view that I don't think that Rory was as bad to Lane as some people feel. And I feel like the struggles that they experience is mostly in the beginning, which I think was the show was trying to demonstrate that this is what happens in a coming of age, I guess, story that, you're a teenager and you may have these issues that show up in friendships. So I feel like the show kind of explored this earlier on. And then later on, we see a lot more stability with Lane and Rory. Paris didn't have any friends. I don't think I have to explain much here. Madeline Louise didn't have anything in common with her. Paris knew this. They weren't her friends to hang out and do friend stuff. It is true. I don't think that Rory ever saw Paris as a best friend. But in order to be friends, I don't think you have to see someone as a best friend. But it does seem like Paris did see Rory as her best friend. All right, so did Paris have any friends? I do feel like Madeline and Louise were her friends, but as this opinion states, I do kind of agree the fact that they weren't actually close in the way that we would conceive as a good friendship would be close. The impression that I get is that they were kind of friends from childhood. And so as they grew, they stuck together because they've known each other for so long, but they've grown apart in the sense of the fact that they weren't really interested in the same things. So at the end of the day, it does feel like her closest friend was Doyle. Paris did not deserve to get into Harvard more than Rory. Paris may have deserved to get into Harvard, but so did Rory. Rory was smart and did work hard. She had not been padding her extracurriculars for as long as Paris, but that isn't because she didn't care or wasn't willing to put in that effort. It's because she got a public school education and her mom never went to college. Yeah, so we don't actually see Rory's complete academic career or all the things she's done outside of school to get into Harvard, but it does seem like Rory's presented as a smart character who did work very hard in school, and she did things outside of school that would look good on a college application. So I do agree with the fact that Rory does also deserve to get into Harvard. Paris is also presented as someone who's very smart, and the show, I believe, presented Paris as a character who didn't get in primarily because of the interview. Lots of fans grew to love Paris by the end of the show and thought she was a better friend to Rory. While she did have some growth, she never really changed. She was always way too intense, untrusting, and sometimes vindictive. Kind of agree with this one. At the end of the day, I don't feel like Paris was a better friend to Rory than Lane was, for example. I do feel like the show was trying really hard to keep Paris consistent. And so I feel like they used her a lot as a comic relief character or as a character to drive drama. And so all these things that happened with Paris, such as her running the Yale Daily News, her kicking Rory out, Paris then being resentful towards Rory when she starts back on at the Yale Daily News, and the affair with Asher, all those things I think were done as sort of a way to bring drama into Rory's life. And so I did kind of feel like the show was sometimes treating Paris as someone who is not designed to necessarily grow a lot, but someone who's designed to entertain and to create all these different dramatic scenes for the show. Paris was a better friend to Rory, and their competition challenged her to be better. Rory's other friends, family, people in the town rarely called her out on her crap. Lane knew about the Dean affair, and she never said anything about how wrong it was. So this is a really interesting opinion because I think it brings up a lot of different elements about, I guess, what people look for in friendship. And I feel like I agree that friends are great when they challenge you and they challenge you to be better. When it comes to Paris, I get the impression that when she was competing with Rory in high school, it wasn't because she wanted to make Rory better, but it was in the interest of competition. That Paris wanted to beat Rory, but she wasn't doing it in an effort to make Rory better as a person because she kind of saw Rory as an antagonist. And once we get to college, I kind of get the impression that Paris was kind of using Rory as a friend, but also to rely on her. That the times when Paris would push Rory, it wasn't so much just purely out of her love for Rory, but in order to help herself at the same time. That she wanted Rory by her side, and so for me, the intention matters. That how does Paris feel about Rory, and why does she do the things that she does? So when it comes down to friendship, I feel like I thought Lane was a better friend to Rory, not because she was challenging her, but because she was there to support her. And I feel like Paris was competing not for the interest of Rory, but in her self interest. It is an interesting point about Lane never talking about how wrong Rory was with the affair. The one scene that we have is Rory talking to Lane about what happened, and Lane is just very curious about Rory's experience. And I also kind of wish that Lane would have said something. The way that the scene plays out, it kind of gives this impression that Rory's beating herself up at this point. She's ranting and talking about how wrong it was, what Lorelai said, and how upset she is, and how she's already beating herself up about it. And so perhaps it's this feeling that, well, she sees that Rory's already upset. So what's the point of pouring more salt on the wound? So that's why Lane didn't say anything. I don't know if Paris would have pushed Rory to be morally better because earlier that year, Paris had an affair with Asher, and it wasn't a one time thing. It was a continuously seeing Asher and sleeping with Asher while she was dating Jamie. So when it comes to pushing someone to be better, I guess it's another, I guess, deviation from what we look for in a friend of would Paris push Rory to be better as a human being? Because outside of school, outside of competition, outside of academics, it's also about being a better person, treating people with kindness, factoring morality and honesty and compassion towards others. And so I guess where I deviate from this opinion is sort of whether or not Paris would truly push Rory to be a better human and to treat other people better and to be more conscientious, to not be entitled, because Paris also comes from this world of, upper class, and we see that Paris doesn't always treat people the best. She doesn't always treat workers the best. So I guess that's where I land. I wish Paris had gotten a better ending. I love Paris. She's my favorite character in the show, and frankly, the reason I started watching Gilmore Girls in the first place. She also happens to be the one I resonate with the most. I understand her every decision in the earlier seasons, but I wish she had gotten a better character development in the later seasons and the revival. I also wish that Paris would have gotten a better ending and gotten more growth in the revival and I guess later seasons. What I'm wondering is that perhaps it's because they didn't want to take the spotlight away from Rory. And when I was focused on Paris, here's what I noticed. I'm sure that probably everyone is already thinking that I hate Paris as a character, and I don't hate I don't hate Paris. I know I've been very critical, and I feel like part of this comes from the fact that I feel like Liza Wells is just a fantastic actress, and I feel like they didn't use her fully to her potential. Like when you see Paris being vulnerable, she's just so good. Liza Wells is just so good at playing this vulnerable character, and she's really good at also being a very intense character. And I wonder if they let her grow, if she would have completely stolen the show because she has such a dynamic range as an actress. And because she's coming from this very controlling and stressful state to then become a very evolved character, I think would have just really stolen the show, considering the fact that she's been through there throughout all the seasons. And I also feel like perhaps the writers were trying to keep her character consistent because they thought, well, people love Paris because she's so funny and because her intensity is what brings a lot of comedy. And so if they take that away, then perhaps the audience wouldn't like her as much, wouldn't like the show as much. So that might have been the driving force. So I would have loved to see this growth. And I feel like it would have been really, really cool if they did that, if she was addressing some of the controlling behavior, some of the paranoia, if she opened up to more people. And I know some people feel that Paris does grow on the show. And I feel like there is some growth in the sense of we see her relationship change with Rory. For me, I just didn't feel like it was there, but it wasn't enough because we don't see her change with respect to people in general. So she gets close to Doyle, she gets close to Rory, but her attitude towards people doesn't change as a whole, so that if we were watching this show from a different character's perspective, they wouldn't really see the growth that Paris has because it's very focused on a few characters. So I feel like she would have been just such a dynamic and interesting character if they allowed her to have a little more growth in the later seasons. Yeah, and I wish that too as well. Same with the revival. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but I think Logan is way better than Tristan. I've read many comments which said they wanted Tristan for Logan's storyline, but I think it would have been better. I like Logan the way he is. I think it might be a popular opinion. I don't know, because Logan is just a lot more developed as a character, and Tristan, we only get him really in the first season, a little bit in the second, but he's mostly one dimensional. They give some glimpses into his backstory. We show a little bit of his vulnerable side, but he's really kind of stagnant. So I think Logan is a lot more developed, and so he's a better character because we get to see a lot more of him and his changes, his growth. I think it would have been interesting to see Tristan in Logan's storyline to see how it would have changed. Would he have been better? I don't know. The revival ruined Logan and made him a cheater, which he hadn't been before. Rory, much as I love her, was a serial cheater in the OG series. She cheated on Dean with Jess, she cheated with Dean on Lindsay, and she cheated on Logan with Jess. The way she behaved in the revival was weird to me in that her cheating seemed intentional and pre-planned instead of an impulsive decision that she regretted after the fact. But Logan never actually cheated in the OG series. Yeah, I could see this. I feel like in my earlier video on Rory, I did say that Logan cheated. Now that I've thought about more, I do see how from his point of view, he wasn't cheating because he genuinely believed that he was broken up. So is he a serial cheater? I guess the original show doesn't quite portray him as a cheater, more as like a womanizer rather than someone who blatantly cheats. So is it out of character? So based on the original series, it doesn't seem like he's a blatant cheater, but he does become so later in the revival. Is it just a complete departure from his character? I don't know. I guess because of the way that he's portrayed initially as a womanizer, it doesn't mean that someone's a cheater, but I guess it doesn't seem like a completely absurd interpretation, although it does seem kind of weird in the revival. I do feel like that whole thing with Rory and Logan is just I don't know. I don't know what the show is going for there. Rory should not have been seeing Logan in the revival, and maybe shouldn't have been with any of her exes from the OG series. I actually like Logan and I like him and Rory together. My first choice for her is Jess, and I do think her being with him in the revival would have made more sense than Logan. But I also think that they could have given her someone new. Yeah, so I guess this ties in a little bit to the previous opinion. I would have liked to see Rory with someone new or with nobody. I guess this kind of goes back to the fact that ASP wanted to continue her original intent. And so she probably envisioned Logan with Rory. And so she continued that. I would have liked to see Rory with somebody else. The girls' love interests seem almost too perfect. I'm talking about Lane, Paris, and Rory here, although I think this goes for the other female characters in this show as well. The fandom tends to hate Dean a lot, although I understand it in the later seasons. I always found it strange in the earlier seasons. Dean is this teenage boy, his only main flaw seems to be in that he's controlling and wants a housewife. Considering his age, I would expect there to be more flaws, and to hate him based off of these traits seems odd to me. Then there are guys like Dave, Jamie, maybe even Marty in the beginning who seem almost a little too perfect to appear as a love interest in a normal teenager's young adult's life. Now, this I think is an unpopular opinion. Some of the love interests I do think are portrayed in a bit of a perfect way. In the very beginning, I think Dean is kind of portrayed as a more perfect boyfriend, and then he starts to show more flaws. I think starting from the first breakup, and I think I would agree that before the cheating element, he did come off as controlling and quite angry. But given his age, I think it's more understandable than, I guess, with some of the other characters. Dave was certainly presented as quite perfect. Marty seemed okay in the beginning. With the other love interests, though, I feel like they were quite imperfect. So Jess gets criticized a lot. Logan gets criticized a lot. When it comes to Paris, I think Duel gets criticized. And I also definitely think that Zach is also presented as very imperfect. So I guess I diverge on this opinion as well because I think that a lot of Rory's boyfriends get criticized. And a lot of these criticisms I think are valid. So Jess is kind of very rough in the beginning. Logan gets criticized for some of his behavior, and Zach gets criticized for how he treats, I guess, the bandmates and Lane in the beginning. Yeah, I do think that some of the characters are presented in a more perfect light, but others are not. Dean breaking up with Rory at the dance marathon wasn't terrible. Rory was actively jealous of Shane in front of him. She even clung to Dean in a scene to make Jess jealous. I would do the same thing if a guy did that to me. Yeah, I think that Dean breaking up with Rory is not terrible. I think that the way that it played out was kind of unnecessary. Well, if it was real life, right? So I think that looking at that whole scenario, I feel like the way that Rory acted was just so extreme. And I feel like it makes perfect sense for Dean to be very upset. And anyone in Dean's shoes would be very upset by it and would want to break up with Rory because it's like, well, my gosh, this is a woman who's blatantly just into another guy right in front of him. And so I think that it could have been handled a little bit better if this was a real scenario where it's like, oh, I see you're doing this. I'm going to go have a conversation with you and break up with you right now. But because this is a show, it was done in a very, very public way where he's breaking up with her very loudly in a ballroom. So I don't think the fandom takes issue with Dean breaking up with Rory. And I'm not that upset with Dean doing it so publicly because it's just like he's put into such a tough spot in that moment. So it makes sense. And I think that it was done so publicly for the sake of drama. My unpopular opinion is that while everyone is allowed to dislike a character or their actions, they have to remember that at the end of the day, they're still all actions that are needed to bring the plot forward or to make the show more interesting. For example, if Rory had stayed the same as in season 1, people would have been bored by her character. Here's a related comment. I came here to comment the exact same thing. People criticize characters for doing or saying things they disapprove of, but what kind of a show would it be if everyone always made the right decision every time? There would be no show. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's perfectly valid to criticize a character and their actions, of course, because media is always up for criticism. At the same time, I think that this show probably would not have been as successful if everyone was doing the right thing or if they were doing the right thing most of the time. So we don't want characters to be doing the right thing. We would have probably gotten bored. I know some people don't really like season 1 Rory because they think she's boring, and I think perhaps the show would not have lasted as long. I know people have very strong opinions against Lorelai and Rory, and it would be interesting to see if they were presented as characters who did a lot more, I guess, righteous things or more morally right things. I just don't think it would have been as successful. And I also think it's important to consider the fact that this is a show ultimately where nothing extreme is happening. So when you look at these plot lines, and this is where I started to think about when people were raising, I guess, for example, Lorelai's criticisms of Jess or disliking Jess. And so what I thought about is how Lorelai's feelings may sometimes be valid, but it's the reactions that kind of come off as overblown, and how the town sometimes reacts, which comes off as overblown, and all the characters that maybe they have feelings that are legitimate or that are reasonable, but then they act in these very outlandish ways. And I feel like a lot of this is done to keep the show going and to keep the plot forward because ultimately, this is not a supernatural show. It's not a show where there are murders or major crimes. It's not Sopranos. It's not The Wire. So how do you keep a show going that really has nothing really significant happening? I mean, significant for the characters, but in order to entertain, we have to have characters that do bad things. If Jess hated school that bad, I don't know why Luke just didn't let him take the GED test instead of telling him he could no longer live there unless he wanted to go to high school. Writing this out, I never had put together that both Luke and Lorelai both gave the same ultimatum about going to school to the children they had guardianship over. Yeah, it is kind of parallel. I think the rationale, and I would have to look this up, is that even though GED is considered to be kind of the equivalent, I believe there is a statistic that shows that there's a higher success rate and hiring rate and a higher salary long term of those who have a high school degree versus a GED. So the rationale being, I would have to double check this. I remember seeing this a long time ago, so I could be wrong in the statistic, but I did see about salary and versus GED, high school degree, college degree, and how it varies. And so I guess the thought process would be if you just have 1 year that you've already gone through your whole education and you only have 1 year left, then that 1 year could open up so many opportunities that may be closed for you later on if you take the GED route. Not sure where this opinion falls, but Jess was wild for saying that he knew Rory better than anyone after not having spoken to her for years. And I think Rory going back to Yale after that conversation wasn't so much that he knew her so well and knew where she was really supposed to be, so much as Rory was embarrassed to show Jess what her life looked like at that moment. Uh, yeah, I agree with this one. I feel like Rory went back, and I got this impression that it was this kind of element of embarrassment that, oh, she's not doing what she feels like she should be doing. Or it's like you see someone you haven't seen in a really long time, and they ask you, what are you doing with your life? And all of a sudden, you kind of think back on where you are in your position and wanting to be better. I do think that that line with Jess of "I know you better than anyone," I feel like that was done again for dramatic effect, and it is kind of wild because unless there's things that we're supposed to presume off screen that were never shown, but I mean, I guess we're supposed to kind of interpret based on the show that Lorelai would know Rory better than anyone. For me to accept the view that Jess knew Rory better than anyone, I would have wanted to see more scenes of Rory and Jess sharing really personal things or sharing things that they wouldn't want to share with anyone else because I could conceive of this conceptually, but I don't think the show gave us enough evidence to suggest that Jess knew Rory better than anyone. Richard Gilmore was a very bad and unethical person. An already rich, entitled man, he would do anything to get ahead. As a parent, he was terrible to Lorelai. He would never listen to her. All the times he just mentioned Christopher's success in the early seasons, I just wanted to punch him. I'm not disinclined to agree with this opinion. I feel like Richard is a very entitled man and he's kind of cold and he does so many things that are just so troubling. The Jason thing I think is absolutely awful. We do have moments of vulnerability from him. So there are some aspects of him which I like, but I think that he does things that are very troubling. I think season 7 is better to watch than season 6. I don't think I have a take on this opinion, just because I don't think I clearly remember specifically season 6 and season 7. I do think that season 7 does some things that I like more. Specifically, I feel like I liked how the new writers approached Luke's character more in season 7. I feel like everything just feels a little bit milder in season 7, but I don't have a personal take on season 6 versus season 7. I never liked the Suki Jackson ship, so the vasectomy plotline didn't ruin it for me. Generally, I see people say they were cute in the beginning, but I just found them annoying as a couple and childish, teenagerish in their relationship struggles. For example, that whole basket bidding, you don't want me to move in with you, B plotline. So with Suki and Jackson, I really liked the very beginning. So when they went on their first date, what I kind of wish happened is that I wish they would have dragged out their courtship process a little bit more, or at least had maybe half a season or maybe a whole season of them just kind of having this bickering contest with each other and then starting to slowly like each other. I feel like they rushed into their relationship just so fast that we only see Jackson a few scenes and then all of a sudden Suki wants to go out with him. So I liked their first date, and after that, I kind of got over their relationship. So once they started dating, I wasn't really as invested. And I also kind of think that vasectomy plotline is just a little bit of a mess. I'm not sure if this is unpopular per se, but I don't care for Miss Patty. Her antics with hitting on every handsome man, including extremely young men, aren't funny. They're creepy. Women need serious help. Yeah, one aspect of the show that aged horribly, and I know I in my video on Patty and Babette, one person said that it was never okay, that the show wasn't portraying something that was acceptable. And I guess just to clarify that, it was not acceptable during the period of time that the show aired, but it's something that was acceptable in the media, that a lot of the media was okay with portraying an older person going after a younger person, that being seen as either romantic and given like Pretty Little Liars or funny in the case of Miss Patty. So I think that taking Miss Patty and looking at her actual behavior, it is extremely troubling. When she hits on people who are not underage, I don't really have much of an issue. It really depends on how uncomfortable she makes them feel. And sometimes when she does make someone uncomfortable, it is problematic. Other times it's just laughed off. So I feel like my issue really is when she hits on Dean. and that is the aspect that I find to be most troubling. I like Lucy and Olivia. I know this is unpopular because everyone seems to hate them, but I enjoyed them. I'm a big Kristen Ritter fan, and this was one of the first roles I ever saw her in. She totally won me over. I didn't love the Marty of it all, how they ruined his character, and I can certainly concede that it was a little weird to give Rory new friends in the final season, but I didn't think they were bad or uninteresting characters, and I thought their dynamic with Rory was fun. I'm a Kristen Ritter fan, and I was happy to see her. By the time that I saw season 7, I had seen Kristen Ritter and other things, and so I was like, oh, I didn't know she was on the show. So I automatically liked her because of that, and I think that was it she played Lucy, right? And then Olivia also seemed kind of cool. I feel like they just weren't given enough of a chance to develop, and I think mostly the issue is the fact that they were introduced so late in the show. But I think that if they were introduced earlier, or at least in even season 6, I feel like they might have been a lot more likable because I think they would have brought a lot of interesting elements to Rory's life. We would finally see new friends in Rory's life besides Paris and Lane. So I think they could have been really cool. And unfortunately, they didn't really get a chance to grow on this particular show. But I don't have a hatred for Lucy and Olivia, and I think they could have been interesting characters. Why does Mr. Kim get a pass? Is he an absentee dad? We never even see him, and I've never seen Lane mention that he ever stepped in to help her when her mom is unreasonable. For the longest time, I thought he was dead or still living in Korea. So the mystery of Mr. Kim. I think that this is kind of like a joke for the show, or it's something the show just chose not to address. At one point, I think they became aware of the fact that they never cast Mr. Kim, and then they just sort of kept that going because in season 1, he's mentioned. And I think he's not mentioned in any other seasons. Because I think that the show probably wanted to cast someone and then they probably figured it would have been just too complicated to incorporate another character in the plot line and to sort of then incorporate him into the dynamic between Lane and Mrs. Kim. So I'm guessing the writers just didn't know how to incorporate a father figure into this dynamic with Lane's mom being very controlling and with Lane. So he became this sort of mystery. And I think it's hard to say whether or not he's an absentee dad or not because we get no information on him. For all we know, he could either be a completely deadbeat dad and just completely gone and doesn't care, or he sacrificed his happiness and his future for the sake of his family, and he's grinding away somewhere abroad, doing something internationally and sending all his money back. And that's the only way that he can support his family because his family needs financial help. And so he's there for them, but he can't be physically there. So there are so many different things that we could fill in the gaps with Mr. Kim. I have a funny headcanon for him, which maybe I'll mention when I eventually decide to do an unhinged video on all the different theories for Gilmore Girls, which perhaps we'll see. So yeah, Mr. Kim is an enigma. When I first watched the show, I thought the main focus was in the parenting style, a traditional rule-based children don't know anything sort of way versus a more close one based in trust and open communication. But now, for me, it's about Lorelai growing up, her dreams, her issues with men, with her parents, etc. The impression that I get is that when Amy Sherman Palladino created the show, she wanted to focus specifically on the mother-daughter relationship. And we do see throughout the show that there is a focus on different parenting styles. I don't know if that was purposefully Amy's intent to really hone in on this parenting style concept. It's possible that she wanted to explore all different things. If anyone has a specific interview or an article that talks about Amy Sherman Palladino's intentions with the show, please let me know. I'm not personally aware of what ASP intended, but I think a person can view this show in multiple ways because it is a character-focused show, but also at the same time, there's a lot of focus on the parenting styles as well. The more I watch Gilmore Girls, the more I have issues with Lorelai. Lorelai is a very entitled woman. She thinks that because she made it in life when she got pregnant at 16 and raised Rory on her own, she feels that the town should put her on a pedestal. Some examples. She nagged the coffee waitress for the candy cane coffee even though she knows that Christmas is over. She shoos away the bicyclist out of the gazebo. She complains about the new menus and makes insults with Luke because of it. She also displays a lot of controlling behaviors. She didn't tell Emily and Richard about her engagement with Max and Luke and her elopement with Chris. She sent a Dear John letter to her parents and ran away, which caused more damage to the relationship with Emily and Lorelai. I have seen this opinion come up a few times. I do think there are moments when Lorelai does act entitled. With the examples that were provided, I kind of understand some of them in a way that I think there's valid judgment or criticism there, but I don't think it's a example of necessarily entitlement. I guess, for example, with the whole Lorelai and Luke thing, what the show is trying to do is demonstrate how much Lorelai likes Luke, and they did the same thing with Luke as well, that when Lorelai was dating someone, we see a lot of elements of Luke kind of being jealous and showing resentment. So that was the show's way of showing how they like each other, which I don't know if I liked the way that the show approached that necessarily. So the thing when it comes to the issues with her parents, I feel like that's a whole other bag. But the earlier examples, which I specifically don't remember, but there are times where I think Lorelai just kind of take charge in a way that kind of dismisses others. So I feel like this is a way for the show to be kind of quirky. Yeah, so I do think there are moments when Lorelai is entitled. I can't remember those specific examples that you mentioned, but I do think there are moments like that. I think Lorelai has ADHD, is neurodivergent, and people give her too much shit for being immature. That was part of the plot. That she was a young mom, that she was also sheltered and ignorant, just like Rory. It was about generational abuse and the past repeating itself. The opinion about Lorelai being neurodivergent ADHD, so I've discovered that every single character has been sort of diagnosed by the fandom, which is, I think, a thing that is interesting because I think that the show kind of intended for the characters to be exaggerations of normal humans. So when it comes to diagnosis, and I'm guilty of this as well, I think we kind of have to consider the fact that the show used characters that were not quite fully how we see humans in real life, that they're exaggerated versions of humans because they were trying to make things as entertaining as possible. So the point about Lorelai being immature and that being part of the plot, yeah, so I do think that Lorelai's personality is an element of the plot and how she kind of stayed a little bit stagnant because of what happened with her parents. I think that's an element. Of course, people are allowed to criticize any character as we often do. Rory did not drop out of Yale. She took time off. This is something people sometimes do in college, and it's not the same thing as dropping out. She always intended to go back. So, based on what we see happening on the show, the fact that Rory does go back to Yale, I guess she technically did not drop out. She did take time off. If we focus on the conversation that she has with Lorelai, I do think there's quite a bit of ambiguity. And perhaps I'm also missing, I guess, other conversations later on that shows that there's clear evidence that she always intended to go back. But I guess if we were to focus on the conversation she has with Lorelai, she does at one point say that college kids take breaks all the time. It's not abnormal, which leans into direction that she is just taking a break. But on the other hand, she does say things like, I'm not sure if Yale's the right place for me. So it's kind of clear enough that she doesn't have this clear intent to go back to Yale necessarily. And based on that conversation, I do think that's not entirely clear if she always intended to go back. I guess at the end of that conversation, Lorelai says, "You're not quitting Yale," and Rory says, "Yes, I am." Rory's not very clear in saying, "I'm only taking a break. I am going to go back to school," because she says that she doesn't know what she wants to do. And in that time off, it's possible that she could find something, perhaps becoming an author, where she may decide, I don't need to go back to school. I don't need to have a college degree for what specifically I want to do. But if there are other scenes that make it clear that she always intends to go back, and it's possible I'm missing something, please let me know in the comments. But I guess if I were just focusing on that conversation, I do think it's left ambiguous enough. I used to think of Rory moving in with Richard and Emily as a parallel to Lorelai finding the independence in, but my view has shifted a lot. Lorelai kicked Rory out of Stars Hollow and by extension cut her off from the town, leaving Rory with no other options. Lorelai had a choice to stay. I understand why she didn't, but Rory was dependent on her being able to come home. I think there are still good parallels thematically, but I wonder what Rory would have done if she didn't have Richard and Emily to fall back on. That's a good take. I do think there are some elements thematically between Lorelai running away and Rory running away. It's not the same situation, certainly, because with Lorelai, her parents weren't kicking her out. She ran away, but with Rory, she kind of felt like she had no place to go. But I think that the show was trying to kind of draw a parallel with how Lorelai left and Rory left, and then Rory got to experience what Richard and Emily are like when you live with them. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of differences in those situations. I don't think that the show was trying to necessarily say that they're equal, but I do think they were trying to give Rory the experience of what it's like to live with Emily and Richard. Rory does not think she's perfect. She thinks she has to be perfect. She's a people pleaser because she feels like she always had to apologize for her existence, as Lorelai conceiving her essentially ruined Lorelai's future and broke up the Gilmore family. So yeah, I agree with this one. I also feel like Rory feels like she has to be perfect. I don't know if Rory sees herself necessarily as perfect. I also think Rory does have moments of entitlement herself. they're characters, and also humans also sometimes have elements of entitlements themselves. But yeah, I do feel like Rory more so feels like she has to be perfect rather than viewing herself as perfect. Rory was set up to fail, not literally. She was actually set up for success, so much so that it led her to fail. The constant praise around her by everyone was the reason she failed. She was so deeply loved and praised by everyone, Stars Hollow, her mother, her grandparents, Chilton, that she became entitled. She never had to think, what if I failed? At the back of her mind, she believed it too. I am perfect. After she got told, you don't got it, that's when she almost wanted to make mistakes. Shock everyone. The best way I can explain it, this is Teen Idol by Marina. So I assume Teen Idol by Marina is a song. That's actually also my name, Marina. So I guess I do diverge a little bit with this opinion, just based on the previous opinion. I do feel like Rory had more of this feeling that she had to be perfect. And so this take on the fact that Rory was set up to fail because she was praised by everybody. I saw this other opinion. Let me see if I can find it about how some people feel that it's not entirely consistent to say that Rory was always constantly praised. So she was praised by Lorelai, certainly, and by her grandparents. I do feel like she did face a lot of challenges at Chilton. So I get this impression that Rory wasn't really as praised by everybody and that she had a lot of failures before. So let me see if I could dig this opinion up. Sadly, I can't find it, but the opinion was asking me if I could make a video talking about how Rory faced a lot of challenges and criticisms even before the whole Mitchum drama. And when it comes to, I guess, her arc, I feel like the show kind of repeated some things. Like when she starts Chilton, we see that she starts failing right away. She gets bad grades and she feels very disappointed, upset because she's going from, a regular public school to Chilton, and all of a sudden she's not doing so well. And, she has a hard time fitting into Chilton because she has a lot more work. She's not used to the level of work that's put on at a private school. We see that she's overwhelmed and she's not doing well, so she had to overcome that. So we've seen her struggle academically and at the same time feeling like she doesn't fit in because as soon as she starts Chilton, Paris is out to get her, Tristan is all over her, and she has no friends at Chilton. So it's a new environment and a new challenge for her. But then when she goes to Yale, we see the exact same thing happen where she's breaking down. She feels overwhelmed. She's told by a guidance counselor that because she has to drop a course, because she's not keeping up with everything. So we see her fail at Yale. Not fail completely, but we see her struggling at Yale as well for the same reasons that she was struggling at Chilton. So throughout it, I feel like this idea that Rory was constantly praised, I feel like the Mitchum thing wasn't really the first time that we see this. So I guess I see the Mitchum criticism not as an example of, oh, Rory realized she wasn't perfect for the first time, because we see that she faces the same thing at Chilton and Yale, but like a kind of a reckoning of, oh, I don't know how I feel about my particular field, about specifically journalism. And she's had issues, faced criticism with journalism also at the same time, because when she joined the Yale Daily News, Doyle has criticized her writing and, he would mark it up. So he was very harsh with her. So she's also been criticized for journalism before that she had to sort of work through. But this is Mitchum, who is, again, a very, very well-known industry professional. So having someone like him criticize her, I think was just a much harsher blow. I saw a Reddit post where someone said you can't really blame Rory for struggling to accept that she's a rich, entitled kid. She grew up literally in a potting shed because her and her mom could not afford a home. And I agree with that point a lot. Rory and her mom continued to struggle financially even well into her Yale years. Despite help with Rory's Yale tuition, there's an entire plotline of Lorelai being completely and utterly broke as a result of starting the Dragonfly, and also smaller mentions of Rory struggling with money throughout her years in college before she dropped out. So yes, that is a good point, and I could see definitely how Rory would not be able to fully accept that she's a rich, entitled kid because she didn't grow up that way. And so, of course, she might not see herself as someone like Logan because she didn't really have the same thing. And I guess something about the point about Rory struggling financially, I can't remember those examples. So if anyone remembers Rory struggling financially throughout college years, any examples of that, please let me know. Nothing's coming to mind. So because I got the impression that when it comes to finances, we see Lorelai struggling and Lorelai sort of trying to shield Rory from the, I guess, truth of financial struggle. That back when she's in high school, when Rory's in high school, they have the issue with the house having termites and Lorelai needing to take out a loan, and Lorelai getting mad at Rory because she doesn't want her grandparents' help. So we do see their financial struggle early on. And we do see Lorelai struggle financially when she opens up the Dragonfly Inn. But I remember Lorelai kind of trying to shield Rory from that. So there's a scene where Rory comes home and she's asking Lorelai, are the light bulbs dimmer? Where are the subscription magazines? Are you trying to sort of save money? There's like actually food in the fridge. So I got the impression that Lorelai was kind of acting. Lorelai was like, no, 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 everything's fine. I'm not saving money. That Lorelai kind of was pretending with Rory that no, everything's fine. So Rory wasn't fully aware of the financial struggle. So when it comes to finances, from what I remember, it was mostly Lorelai that kind of experienced the challenges of finances. And I don't recall specific examples of Rory struggling financially when she's at Yale, but so please let me know. What I think is that Rory's inability to fully appreciate, I guess, her privilege is not so much of her background, but more so the people that she's surrounded by. And I could actually see this happening, I guess, with a lot of people that when you are constantly surrounded by people who are all trust fund kids, because she started to associate with Logan and his gang, if everyone around you is a trust fund kid and who's crazy wealthy, a person would feel very different from that because it's like I don't have any of those things. And so I think that that actually had more of an influence rather than Rory's background, because by the time that Rory's at Yale, she is in a different position. And sure, she's not wealthy in that moment, but if she was having the same conversations about finances in the future with someone, let's say like Lane or Dean or Jess, I think it would become apparent very quickly that Rory's not in the same place as they are. Getting something like $250,000 when you're 25 and she's not there yet, but it's going to happen within just a few years, is just a massive life-changing event for so many people. It's huge. And that ultimately Rory does come from generational wealth and that all of that money is going to come to her eventually. And she is a trust fund kid, but because she comes from a different background and everyone around her, it's just like if you take an average middle class American and you surround them only with people who are insanely rich, they wouldn't feel entitled. But if you take them and take them down to Appalachia or just really, really poor parts of the country, they would feel very different. So if Rory had a different circle of friends, which is where I think Marty could have been an interesting character, and I saw one comment say that Marty was also going to get a trust fund, but I don't remember that specifically. I got the impression that Marty really just comes from a middle class background. So if Rory had friends that were more like her, I feel like she would have understood more that despite the fact that she had this background, she is going to be coming into a lot of wealth, and her association with her grandparents does open her up to a lot of opportunities and provides her more of a safety net than with a lot of people that a lot of people don't have that. Lane would have to think about things like retirement and worry about what the future is going to look like. Whereas for Rory, it does look a little bit different. It's never fully discussed if Rory is going to completely reject all that money in the future. So I guess for me, I get more of the impression that it's more so the people that you're surrounded by that kind of influences how you perceive yourself. My unpopular opinion is that Rory's dalliance with Dean was an understandable mistake for a sheltered and emotionally immature girl that she was, thus did not ruin her character for me. Her reaction to Mitchum Huntsberger tearing her down, on the other hand, was a complete break in her character. She had shown herself to be shrewd in earlier seasons, as well as quite fiery when dealing with annoying people, getting in their faces, and she had known quite intimately that the Huntsberger family saw her as inferior. While Mitchum's words would make her angry, I do not believe she would be properly upset by them, especially not to the point she decides to commit grand theft nautical. This also brings me to my least popular opinion. On the night of the boat theft, Logan disqualified himself from the position of Rory's boyfriend. When he saw her upset, he could have recognized her need to call off and then conspired to not get her arrested. He should have shown his care for her, for keeping all her options in life open, options that an arrest record might endanger. All right, so I guess a lot of opinions here. The first one is the Rory Dean affair. That's one I'm not entirely, I don't have a strong feeling on whether or not it's a break in her character. I guess I could see how it makes sense for her character. Rory's reaction to Mitchum. I do feel like the show was trying to be dramatic with that scene of her stealing a yacht, and I feel like a lot of people feel that it was out of character. I do kind of feel like it was out of character, and I feel like it was mostly done for drama. So the opinion on Logan, I diverge a little bit on this take simply because I just feel like, well, it does seem consistent with Logan's character that the mentality is not, oh, we're probably going to get arrested, but we're probably going to get away with it. Logan has gotten away with a lot of things. So I can imagine that within this character's mindset, the thought is, we're not going to get arrested. We're going to get away with it. I've gotten away with so many things. So he wasn't really thinking about oh, this could endanger her future. Um, I guess the reason why I feel a bit differently is that I don't feel like I want to put all this responsibility on Logan to take care of someone who's acting irrationally. He could have acted better for himself, but it's kind of like he has to protect Rory from making poor choices, but it's her poor choice to make. I guess I feel a little weird putting a lot of Rory's actions here on Logan or his responsibility to protect her in that sense, but I would love to know what people think. My unpopular opinion was that Mitchum was not only completely right in what he said, but he also did Rory a favor. The entire situation could have served as a wake up call to Rory and given her some drive to put herself out there and be more assertive. If this was truly her dream, but instead she let the whole thing totally destroy her. It's a cutthroat industry and she would need to face much harsher critics than Mitchum. So I did do a video on this topic, and I know some people were upset the fact that I did not actually state my opinion at the end, but I think the thing with that video is that it was a very different video from what I set out to make. I set out to make a specific video sharing my opinion, but then I ended up arguing both sides because I wanted to present all possible arguments. And by the time that I did that, I was kind of in this in-between state because I kind of came to this conclusion that it's not even the right question, I guess, was he right or wrong? Because it's such a very narrow view, I think, of just, I don't know, not to get overly broad in it. I don't kind of see humanity in this way of that a person has something or they don't have something. We could look at something very simple, like a person either has sight or don't. But for something like drive, I do feel like it's something that changes and evolves over time. We do see some examples where Rory does sort of try to fight back in this cutthroat environment. So with respect to the view that Mitchum completely destroyed her, I think it really, again, ultimately depends on the timeline because we do see that she falls apart right afterwards, but then she does later on bounce back and she's very aggressive when it comes to trying to get a job.
And my portfolio. Samples of all my writing, all my work from the Yale Daily News, plus a couple of spec pieces that I've just recently finished. Ideas, potential pitches, theater reviews.
So I think it really depends on where you're looking at Rory, at what point in her timeline. And if we do look at the revival, then I think it is easier to say that she's lacking this drive. But we do see moments where she's very aggressive. So I guess I land on this opinion that this concept of having a passion and having a drive does wax and wane over time. So that is it for the unpopular opinions. Let me know what I missed. Let me know what you think about these opinions. And I'll see you guys in the next one.